For more on the stimulus negotiations, let's bring in Virginia's Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Senator Kaine is the ranking member of the Senate's Armed Services Readiness Subcommittee and the former governor of Virginia. You may also know him from 2016 when he ran on the Democratic ticket with Hillary Clinton as the vice presidential candidate. Senator Kaine, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. So tell us, what sort of aid does the latest draft have to offer Americans? How do you feel about it?
I feel very, very good about it. The aid is extending unemployment benefits for folks who are hit the hardest, $600 check for an adult and a $600 check for a dependent in a family that is lower and moderate income, housing assistance, food assistance, small business assistance, and then sizable funding both for healthcare and vaccinations and K-12 and higher ed institutions. It's a very needed package. It took us a long time to get there, but it will get an overwhelming bipartisan vote.
Well, last night, as you know, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Pat Toomey settled a dispute that threatened to blow everything up. That dispute would have limited the Federal Reserve's ability to provide emergency loans. Talk to us a little bit more about why this was such a non-starter for Democrats.
It was a very late request by Senator Toomey, so we've been negotiating for quite a while, and this came in at the 11th hour. The reason that we stood so strongly against it, and we're glad to find a compromise, is that the Federal Reserve Bank needs tools to help us restart the economy. We are maybe halfway through this recession. The tools that were available to President Trump should not suddenly be taken away as soon as we know that a new President Biden will begin office on January 21st. His administration needs the same flexibility and the same tools, and the Fed needs the same tools to help Americans and American businesses.
Well, it is an exciting day. The prospect that this is going to pass and the vaccine rolling out, Americans feel rightfully, I think, a sense of optimism. But it has taken 8 months for Congress to come to an agreement on another round of aid for Americans and businesses that, as you know, are struggling to make ends meet. And people are frustrated. What do you say to folks who feel like members of Congress have been putting politics above the need of desperate Americans?
Well, the first thing I would say is we did 4 sizable bills in March and April that injected trillions of dollars into the economy. And as I meet Virginians, I hear so many small businesses, nonprofit groups who benefited, unemployed individuals who benefited, people who appreciated the stimulus check. But you're right, it was much harder to get to agreement on the 5th bill for a variety of reasons. Republicans were worried about the price tag. Democrats didn't like some of the Republicans' requests. So we did good work injecting trillions of dollars in to try to get through this once-in-a-century pandemic, but it has taken too long. It has taken too long. That's why right after Thanksgiving, I told all the senators here that I was going to object to any recess until we got this deal done. And other senators of both parties joined me in that, and we're now just within hours of finally getting it done so that American people can get relief.
I think we will all celebrate when that happens. On the same line of ability to get things done, I want to switch gears just a little bit and discuss Georgia's Senate runoff elections. Of course, the ability of the Biden administration to actually get things done in Washington may be dependent on whether the candidates, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, win these election bids. How are you feeling about their chances? I know you have been very supportive, of course, about your potential Democratic colleagues.
I'm feeling good. I lived in Georgia many years ago, and I know both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. And look, the importance of the races is demonstrated by what we're doing right now. The Democratic majority House passed their 5th COVID bill in May, but the Republican majority Senate has not been able to do it until December, right before Christmas. If we'd had a Democratic majority Senate, we would have acted in the summer and not had to wait for 7 or 8 months. So that's really what's at stake. What's also at stake is, are we going to have an administration and a Congress that will follow the science around the pandemic, or will we have a Congress that will continue to, follow, frankly, anti-science folks like the president and some of his supporters? We've got to follow the science. I feel good about the races. I think they'll be very close because Joe Biden won Georgia, and it was very close. But in my interaction with people that I know from Georgia, from having lived there many years ago and other friends I have there, I think we have an excellent chance so long as people turn out with energy and enthusiasm between now and January 5.
President-elect, as you mentioned, Biden did win Georgia. It was a bit of an upset given how red the state traditionally is, and runoff races in Georgia have typically favored Republicans. Not to mention the fact that every Republican that I've interviewed has made a big deal about the fact that in the down ballot races, Republicans did do really well in the last election. So why are you feeling like this is going to buck the trend as well and give Democrats the victory, not of one, but 2 Senate seats in Georgia?
Well, you're right. It's a challenge to win two, but there are 2 factors that make me feel good right now, and neither of them are polls. I think polls are hard to trust. First, energetic turnout. We are seeing just absolute record high turnout in early voting and absentee ballots that have been returned. And you can tell not who those folks voted for, but based on their voting history, you can tell whether there's somebody who votes in Democratic or Republican primaries, and then guess with a high degree of accuracy how they'll likely go. We are very, very happy with the early voting that we're seeing thus far. And second, you see a full-on civil war in Georgia on the Republican Party. You see President Trump fighting with the Georgia governor, fighting with the Georgia Republican Secretary of State. You see the 2 sitting senators, Senators Perdue and Loeffler, joining in a lawsuit filed by Texas to overturn Georgia's election results. I don't think many self-respecting Georgians want Texas attorneys to overturn Georgia elections, but for some reason the Georgia senators have joined in that effort, trashing their own state's electoral integrity, and I don't think that's going to play very, very well. So the combination of the infighting on the Republican side and the strong energy for these 2 Democratic candidates that we're seeing in early vote gives us reason to be optimistic. But make no mistake, you're right, this thing is going to be extremely close.
Well, you mentioned that lawsuit that was brought by Texas, but there's also another lawsuit that made news. On Friday, a federal judge denied a request from Republican Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue to segregate ballots cast by newly registered voters so that they could be investigated later on. It's no surprise to anyone that Republicans, including President Trump, are spending a lot of time and resources challenging Georgia's electoral process. I wonder both if you think that there is any validity to concerns about voting practices in Georgia, and if you're concerned at all, as I've heard from the Democratic side, about the history of voter intimidation and suppression that has previously existed in Georgia, and in some ways that this harkens back to that really terrible time.
Well, and that time was not so far in the past. Georgia has been famous in recent years for dramatic purging of voter rolls, kicking voters off without even giving them necessarily notice that their registrations were being retracted. The lawsuit that the 2 senators filed was sort of shocking, asking that newly registered voters have their votes segregated for extra inspection or analysis. In Georgia, after the presidential election was over, you could continue to register up to December 7th to vote in the Senate races. Under what theory or what basis would you say that people who are registering because they're turning 18 in the middle of November, for example, need to be investigated? It's intimidation behavior that I think perpetrates a false narrative about electoral integrity. And the thing that I'm proud of is that Republican election officials in Georgia have called out these efforts as destabilizing, as undermining of Georgia and American democracy, and have urged Senators Perdue and Loeffler to knock it off. They may not knock it off, but I'm glad some Republicans are willing to stand up and call them out for this anti-democratic behavior.
I think all Americans hope that our democratic institutions are strong enough to bypass party politics when it comes to what's essentially the hallmark of the American democratic process. One last question for you, though, Senator Kaine. Does that mean that if the Democratic candidates, Warnock and Ossoff, don't win election in this runoff race, that you will feel confident in the results? Or do you think that Democrats might also ask for recounts and further investigation into these potential claims of voter intimidation?
We don't go into any election with that intention. Now, sometimes if elections are so narrow that it's just a few votes, candidates are entitled to automatic recounts. In Virginia, for example, the state directs a recount when the races are within a certain margin. And I don't know what the Georgia law is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same. But you don't see Democrats waging a war on our democratic institutions or preaching the kind of false narrative about voter fraud the Republicans do. Yesterday, President Trump encouraged people to show up in Washington on the 6th of January when the electoral votes are counted in Congress to try to raise hell. What other president would do that? You don't see Democrats doing that kind of thing.
All right, Senator Tim Kaine, I know you have a lot of important work to be doing there in Washington. We appreciate you spending some time with us, and happy holidays.
Absolutely. Glad to be with you.